Uneducated, unbroken, unstoppable. The René Pineda story. Every life begins somewhere. Mine began where the sea met hunger in a town called Puerto El Triunfo, a place whose name means triumph, though most of us only knew survival. My mother sold pupusas under the heat of the noon sun, and late into the night 7 days a week her hands were cracked, her smile stubborn. We didn't have much, only the sound of waves, the smell of salt, and the quiet dream that life could be bigger than the shore. I didn't learn my first lessons from books. I learned them from struggle. Hunger was my first teacher. Faith was my second. Hunger does not only live in the stomach. It lives in the soul. It gnaws not at your body, but at your faith, whispering that there must be more to life than survival. My mother stretched the dough the way she stretched her hope to make it last one more day. Every coin she earned was a battle won, every meal a small miracle. I used to watch her count the money in silence, not because she didn't trust numbers, but because she feared what they would tell her, that tomorrow would be harder than today. I grew up among men who wrestled the ocean every morning, and came home with nothing but salt on their faces and fatigue in their bones. The sea fed our bodies, yes, but it starved our dreams. For us, the horizon wasn't freedom, it was a wall. Beyond it, we believed, was a world that belonged to someone else. I didn't know then, but that feeling, that hunger for something unseen, was the beginning of my education. Hunger was my first teacher. It taught me the value of gratitude. It taught me that even a crumb has meaning when you've earned it with sweat. It taught me that you can live poor, but never think poorer. Each dawn was a reminder that some are born to endure, others are born to expand what endurance means. I didn't yet know how, but I felt deep inside that I was not meant to die in the same plaque I was born. The ocean became my first metaphor for freedom. It was endless, mysterious, dangerous, and calling, and though I didn't have a map, or money, or even a plan, I had hunger. The kind of hunger that doesn't crave food, but a reason. That morning, I made my first silent promise that no matter how far I had to go, I would never let hunger be my cage again. Because hunger, when it doesn't break you, becomes the fuel that builds you. The world changed before I understood what the word war even meant. One morning, the fishermen didn't return. That night, the neighbors didn't sleep. Soldiers marched through the streets, shouting orders none of us dared question. I saw men disappear and never come back. I was too young to fight, but old enough to remember every sound, the gunshots, the screams, the silence that came after. My mother taught me to think louder than the bombs. Every thinking was a shield, every tear, a kind of surrender, not to the war, but to something higher than fear. I learned early that fear is a teacher, too, a cruel one, but honest. It tells you how fragile life is, but also how precious. It whispers, run, but deep down, it also whispers, survive. That day, I made a promise, not out loud, but deep inside. I promised that if I survived, I would never live small again, that I would never let fear be the language I spoke, and that my life, somehow, would matter not because of where I came from, but because of what I chose to become. The war stole my innocence, but it gave me something no school could ever teach: the urgency of life. When you live surrounded by death, you begin to treasure every breath as proof that you still have a purpose. That realization became my compass. It pointed me toward the unknown, not to escape, but to evolve. That night, I didn't pray to be safe. I prayed to be strong. And sometimes, that's how every great journey begins, not with certainty, but with a single promise whispered to the wind: there must be more than this. They call it La Bestia, the beast. A train that doesn't carry passengers, it carries dreams. I climbed onto it with nothing but a backpack of faith and fear, no papers, no plan. Only the belief that somewhere ahead, life had to be different. The first night, the wind cut my face like glass. The metal burned my palms. Every sound, The rails, the roar, the screams, became a rhythm I would never forget. We were hundreds, strangers united by one hope to reach the next sunrise. Some prayed to arrive alive. Around me were mothers who left their children behind, fathers running from hunger, and boys like me, chasing an invisible hope. The train shook, the fear grew, but I held on to one thought. If faith could move mountains, maybe it could move me too. Every turn was a question. Would I make it? Would it be worth it? We learned quickly: never fall asleep, never trust the quiet. The beast demanded respect, and every mile we survived felt like a small triumph. At night, I looked at the stars and thought, there are so many lights in the sky. Perhaps one of them shines for me. Faith didn't erase my fear. It taught me to move through it. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep climbing even when your hands tremble. That journey taught me something no school could ever teach: that destiny does not wait for the perfect moment. It waits for the moment you move. And I moved, not because I was brave, but because I was desperate enough to believe. Hope is contagious. When one falls, 10 hands lift him up. On that train, I learned that survival is not a solo act. We didn't share blood, but we shared purpose. And purpose makes brothers out of stranger. I left my country with nothing. But law Bestia carried more than my body, it carried my transformation. Each mile peeled away my fear. Each sunrise baptized me in purpose. I didn't know it yet, but that train wasn't just taking me north, it was carrying me toward the man I was meant to become. When I crossed that border, I didn't find paradise. I found reality, hard, fast, and indifferent. I was a stranger in a country that didn't know my name. But that was fine. Because I didn't come to be known, I came to become. I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant kitchen. The steam burned my arms. The smell of bleach clung to my clothes. I worked in silence, the kind of silence that teaches you patience. In that kitchen, I learned that humility is not weakness. It's strength under control. Every plate I washed was a step. Every long shift, a small victory. I told myself, if you can endure this, you can endure anything. And I did. After that, I became a valet. I parked cars I couldn't afford, and carried keys that opened doors I would never enter. But instead of envy, I chose curiosity. I watched how success moved, how people walked, spoke, decided. Some men complained about the tips. I was too busy taking notes, studying what confidence looked like. Because while others saw luxury, I saw possibility. Then came the mines. Underground, everything changes: the air, the sound, even time. Down there, surrounded by rock and dust, I met myself in the silence. Every day was a battle between man and mountain. Some nights I came home too tired to speak. I'd sit alone in a small apartment, wondering if this was all El Ifa had planned for me. But then I'd remember my mother's words: work is not punishment, it's preparation. And somehow, that made it sacred. Each job stripped me of ego and dressed me in humility. I learned that no work is meaningless when it feeds your future. Success is not measured by what you do, but by the spirit with which you do it. To me, failure will never overtake me if my determination to succeed is strong enough. I live those words every day. Because every sunrise, I woke up tired but kept going, was another silent declaration: I will not be broken. I didn't have diplomas. I didn't have mentors. But I had will. And every shift, every scraped knuckle, every day I refused to quit. That was my education. I was earning a degree in perseverance. The world wasn't watching, but I was watching myself. And that was enough. I didn't know it yet, but every dish I washed, every car I parked, every rock I mined was shaping something greater inside me. The man I was becoming wasn't being built in comfort. He was being built in the grind. Because sometimes, life hides your purpose inside the work no one else wants to do. It happened on what should have been a regular shift. I was working alongside a veteran driller, an older man with years in the trade, the kind who boasted that he'd worked all over Latin America. From the first day, he made it clear he didn't like me. He'd make comments under his breath, jokes about lazy Latinos, or how people from down there never work as hard as Canadians. He said it like a fact, as if he were teaching me something about my own people. I bit my tongue and kept working. I had faced worse than insults before. That day, we were drilling deep into a stubborn rock face. The bit got stuck jammed tight, and the old man started cursing. He blamed me, though I hadn't even touched the controls. I stayed quiet, focused on helping him pull the heavy steel pipes. They weighed like punishment, slick with dust and oil, my muscles burning with every turn. I bent down to grab one of the pipes, bracing my boots against the wet floor. He shouted something I couldn't hear over the roar of the machine, and then, in a burst of anger, he kicked the drill pipe down. The shock hit me like lightning. Pain exploded through my back, wrists, and elbows all at once. I dropped to one knee, gasping for air. The vibration ran through my bones, and for a moment, I thought my spine had snapped. He just stood there, muttering something about me being too slow. He didn't even look at me. The pain grew worse by the hour, spreading through my body until I could barely move. By the end of the shift, I knew something was terribly wrong. My hands trembled, my arms numb. The pain grew worse by the hour, spreading through my body until I could barely move. By the end of the shift, I knew something was terribly wrong. My hands trembled, my arms numb. The supervisor sent me to the medic, and from there straight to the hospital. The X-rays revealed nerve and soft tissue damage. Another injury. Another setback. The doctor said I needed rest and therapy. And rest. In the mining world, the word might as well mean unemployed. That night, I thought about that man, how easily cruelty comes to those who've never had to fight for survival. I also thought about my mother, how she used to say, "Don't waste energy proving yourself to those who already decided not to see you." She was right. I didn't hate the man. I pitied him. He had all the experience in the world and none of the wisdom. The next morning, I looked in the mirror. My body was damaged again, but my will was intact. That's when I realized the mind could break my bones, but not my spirit. Another surgery. Another scar. Another beginning from nothing. I remember staring at the hospital ceiling, listening to the buzz of the lights, and thinking, how many times can a man start over before he breaks? Then I laughed quietly, bitterly, because I already knew the answer, as many times as it takes. When your body fails you, silence becomes your loudest companion. I had worked with my hands all my life. Now they shook just holding a cup. I wasn't a miner anymore. I wasn't anything. At least that's what I thought. One winter morning, I walked into the library not looking for knowledge, just warmth. The moment I stepped inside, the world grew quiet in a way I had never known. The smell of paper, the whisper of page as turning, it felt like walking into another world. I opened the first book I could find, not understanding half the words. Stocks, dividends, equity. It was another language. But I knew how to work, and learning became my new labor. Day after day, I returned. I sat in the same chair, by the same window. Every page was a brick in the foundation I was rebuilding. I didn't know it then, but I was teaching myself how to think. Not just about money, but about meaning. I realized something powerful. The greatest form of wealth isn't stored in banks. It's stored in mind. Knowledge is the only investment that never loses value. For the first time, I wasn't earning a living, I was earning wisdom. The books became my teachers. The silence became my classroom. The library, that building of glass and paper, became my university. I learned about markets, yes. But more importantly, I learned about patience. I understood that money grows the same way character does, slowly, quietly, over time. That day, I gave my journey a name, not because I was ashamed of what I didn't know, but because I had learned to value what I was finally learning. The illiterate investor wasn't just a title. It was a declaration that knowledge belongs to those who seek it, not to those who were born with it. In that library, surrounded by thousands of voices from every century, I found my own. I wasn't a miner anymore. I wasn't a laborer, or an immigrant, or a broken man. I was a student of life. And that realization was my awakening that winter. I didn't just rebuild my life. I reinvented what it meant to live. After months in that library, I stopped chasing answers and began building beliefs. I realized that what I was learning about money was really what I had needed to learn about life. I studied how markets rise and fall, how fear sells and patience multiplies. I began to see patterns, not just in numbers, but in human behavior. People lose money for the same reasons they lose hope: impatience, pride, and forgetting their purpose. I decided that if I was going to invest in anything, it would be in discipline, not greed. I realized something simple but profound: wealth isn't built on secrets. It's built on self-control. And you can't control the market until you first learn to control yourself. Faith became my investment strategy. Not the kind you find in charts or algorithms, but the kind that steadies your heart when everything else shakes. I invested in the only things I could afford: time, faith, and patience. I made a simple plan: learn something new every day, save more than I spent, and never invest in fear. My two mentors became faith and numbers, one teaching me purpose, the other teaching me process. Together, they showed me that wealth without wisdom is just another kind of poverty. I wrote down my rules, not for others, but for myself. 1. Learn something every day. Ignorance is the costliest debt. 2. Save more than you spend. Respect your future. 3. Fall 7 times, rise 8. Resilience compounds like interest. 4. Never invest in fear, not in the market, not in life. 5. Share what you learn. Generosity is the dividend of faith. Soon, I began sharing what I'd learned, writing books not because I was rich, but because I knew what it felt like to be lost. Knowledge, I discovered, multiplies only when you give it away. Money, I realized, is not the reward, it's the reflection. It mirrors who you become, what you've learned, and how much faith you've had in the process. The investor of faith was not a man chasing wealth. He was a man planting seeds, knowing that harvests take time. Because patience is not waiting. It's believing that what you've sown will one day bloom that spring. I stopped surviving and started building. Not an empire. A life. I never set out to be a writer. I just wanted to remember. After years of silence, I had finally found a voice, and it demanded to speak. The story that had lived inside me for years began to pour out. Every wound, every scar, every lesson carved by struggle. I wrote about hunger, work, pain, and faith. About the mines that broke my body and the books that rebuilt my mind. I called myself the illiterate investor, not as a confession, but as a declaration. Because illiteracy is not the absence of letters. It's the refusal to learn. And I had learned the hardest way possible. It took months of rewriting. Some nights, I doubted anyone would care. But then I remembered something my mother used to say: don't tell stories to be heard. Tell them to help. So I wrote, not for applause, but for the one person out there who might see themselves in my struggle. When I held that first copy, I didn't feel proud. I felt grateful. Because I knew that every page was built from pain repurposed into purpose. Then messages started to arrive, from people I had never met. They told me my story gave them courage, that my scars had become their roadmap. I realized then, what we survive becomes sacred only when it helps someone else survive. I saw people begin to believe again. Not in me, but in themselves. That was my real dividend. I had spent my youth earning money. Now, I was earning meaning. I left a copy on the shelf that had once held my first borrowed book. It felt like closing a circle. The miner returning to the mine, but this time, bringing back light instead of scars. I used to think I'd lost everything, my body, my work, my pride. But in truth, I had only lost the noise that once drowned out my calling. Through knowledge, I found faith again. Through purpose, I found freedom. Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. I was never just a miner, or a worker, or an immigrant. I was, and will always be, a believer. A small airplane cuts through clouds over the Pacific. Below, the familiar curve of the Salvadoran coast gleams under golden light. Fishing boats scatter across the blue, tiny as memories. Years had passed since I left home. I had crossed deserts, borders, and battles inside myself. Now, the journey brought me home, not to escape my past, but to honor it. The air smelled the same, salt, dust, and the faint sweetness of coconuts in the distance. The streets had aged. So had I. But the child I once was still waiting for me somewhere between the waves and the wind. I saw my reflection in those children, curious, hungry, unafraid of dreaming. Everything that once felt like poverty, I now saw as preparation. The sea had always been my teacher. It taught me patience, that everything comes in waves. It taught me humility, that even strength must bow to the tide. And it taught me faith that what leaves will one day return. I spoke to the next generation, the ones who think success only lives across oceans. I told them the truth that freedom isn't found. It's built. I saw the same fire I once carried. A hunger that has nothing to do with food, and everything to do with purpose, built through discipline, through learning, and through faith that outlasts your pain. Our actions are like ripples. We may never see where they end, but they move the waters of someone else's tomorrow. I realized then, success was never about money or titles. It was about legacy, about leaving the world a little brighter than you found it. I came from nothing, but I was never poor. Because poverty isn't the absence of wealth. It's the absence of purpose. And now, I know my purpose, to teach others that belief is the greatest currency. Faith built this life. Discipline sustained it. Gratitude keeps it alive. If you ever find yourself broken, remember you can rebuild again, not with strength, but with faith, because the uneducated can learn, the unbroken can teach, and the unstoppable will rise again. I was not born with fortune. I was born with faith. I had no education, but I had hunger to learn. I had no mentor, but I had purpose. And when a man carries those three, faith, hunger, and purpose, nothing can stop him. I walked through fear, through hunger, through darkness. But each step taught me something sacred. Pain builds us character. Work builds wisdom. And knowledge builds freedom. I learned that the illiterate man is not the one who cannot read, but the one who refuses to learn. If you ever find yourself lost, if the world tells you it's too late, remember this: you don't need to have everything to begin. You only need to believe that you can build it. Believe, learn, invest, share. Because in this life, knowledge is wealth, faith is capital, and hope is the compound interest of the soul. Uneducated, Unbroken, Unstoppable. A film inspired by the true story of René Pineda.